The city went dark, every monitor stilled, every machine silent. In that sudden void, the question rose: what happens when the tools you rely on vanish, yet the need for care remains? Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. What unfolded inside that hospital wasn't about technology at all. It was about people. An elderly man, unsettled by the shadows. A fevered infant in anxious arms. A patient who only found peace when truly heard. And it all begins in a room lit with quiet blue monitors. The evening began in rhythm. Soft light glowed from monitors, each one tracing heartbeats and oxygen levels in steady lines. Beeps and hums layered together like background music. Nurses moved bed to bed, checking charts, adjusting pumps, glancing at screens. For a while, everything felt certain. Then it stopped. Every screen went black at once. The monitors, the ventilators, the fourth pumps. The silence that followed was sharper than any alarm. Patients shifted uneasily, and heads turned toward the nurse's station. In the corner, a mother's voice broke the stillness. "What happened to my baby's oxygen?" Emergency lights clicked on, dim and uneven. Shadows stretched across the hallway, transforming familiar spaces into something uncertain. The confident pace of the staff faltered. Nurses pressed fingers against wrists, lips moving silently as they counted. Doctors froze at dark screens that now offered nothing. No data, no clues. They met quickly at the central station, their voices low. One senior physician stepped forward, reminding them what still remained. Their eyes, their ears, their hands. She pulled open a drawer and lifted a heavy flashlight. Its beam cut across the corridor, landing first on a young resident's face. With a nod, she handed it over. A single shift. Machines were gone. The human senses had to take their place. The team fanned out. One bent close to watch a chest rise and fall. Another laid the back of her hand against a fevered forehead. Someone whispered calm words in the dim light, while another timed a pulse. These were old skills, quiet but steady, carried from one generation of healers to the next. And now, they had no choice but to rely on them. How do you practice care when the machines fall silent? That question hung in the air as the staff moved through the half-lit ward, shaping a new kind of order from the chaos. And before long, one patient in particular would put their resolve to the test. Mr. Henderson's chest rose in quick, uneven bursts as shadows filled his hospital room. 82 years old, alone in the sudden dark, he pushed against the rails of his bed, hands fumbling for something solid. The glow and hum he had trusted were gone, replaced by silence that felt unfamiliar and sharp. His voice cracked as he called for a nurse, the sound thin and unsteady. From the corridor, Dr. Evans heard him. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She set her clipboard aside. There was nothing left to study on blank screens. Instead, she let her voice travel ahead of her, calm words, steady and clear, a reminder that someone was near. She didn't begin with questions about pain or medication. She went to what he could recognize. The storm earlier, the way the rain had tapped on the windows. She asked about the photograph next to his bed, the one framed in a narrow strip of light. Family, familiar faces. She offered something to hold on to that wasn't fear. His grip on the rail loosened. His eyes followed her voice. She stepped closer and placed her hand gently over his. Her fingers found the pulse at his wrist. Warm skin, the quiet thrum beneath. She began to count, her own breathing slow, an anchor in the shifting dark. His breath echoed hers, at first trembling, then steadier, until a rhythm unfolded between them. Her words softened, a low murmur, repeating not facts, but presence. The harsh angle of his fear gave way to something less jagged. He leaned back into the pillow, chest rising in time with hers. For a moment, the silence of the ward no longer felt threatening. When a colleague's flashlight swept across the room, it caught a single image, her hand resting over his, pulse beating under skin, fear dissolving to trust. No monitor had measured it, no machine had guided it, just voice and touch. And as the quiet settled, another patient down the hall would soon need that same kind of presence. Only this time, the fear belonged to a child. Baby Leo was carried into the dim ward, fever radiating from his small body. His mother held him close, whispering his name, her worry sharp in the half-light. The fever made his cheeks burn, his breath shallow. The usual thermometer sat useless, its screen dark on the counter. Nurse Campbell stepped forward, a battery lamp casting a faint circle across the bed. She didn't reach for machines. She placed the back of her hand on his forehead, then his neck. Heat confirmed what numbers could not. She leaned close, ear just above his mouth, and counted each breath. In and out. Slow, steady counting in the silence. Her fingers rested gently at his wrist, then pressed one tiny fingernail, watching the color fade and return. That alone told her blood was still moving as it should. The room stayed quiet. She began to hum, barely above a whisper, a tune without words, steady as a heartbeat. Leo's mother started matching her own breathing to the nurse's rhythm, her chest rising and falling in sync, the anxiety in her face loosening as if pulled gently away. Every touch was precise, deliberate. A hand against warm skin, an ear catching a breath, an eye watching color return. Not devices, not data, just careful attention, moment by moment. When Nurse Campbell finally lifted her gaze, her calm expression spoke louder than monitors ever could. She asked for cool compresses, for sips of water, for the simplest measures parents had always known. She showed the father how to shift Leo's position so air would flow easier. Together they worked, and little by little, the heat in Leo's body began to ease. His cries softened into small whimpers. Then, at last, the softened hum of a sleeping child. The circle of lamplight held his family as they exhaled in relief. The fever broke with nothing recorded on a screen. What mattered was seen, heard, and held. This was care measured by attention, not numbers. And just beyond this room, another patient would soon need the same presence, not through touch this time, but through shared silence and words. David came through the ER doors just as the backup generators stuttered to life, his breath sharp and uneven. The staff recognized him instantly, a familiar presence whose anxiety often brought him here at night. Normally, there would be distractions, a TV, fast lab checks, the gentle buzz of the ward. But tonight, none of that existed. If this moved you, share where you found comfort in the comments. Nurse Sarah guided him toward a staff break room where camping lanterns threw warm, uneven rings of light. The air was still, broken only by the soft scrape of a coffee cup on the table. She pulled up a chair, close enough for him to feel anchored. Soon another nurse drifted in, then a young doctor just beginning her shift. They formed a quiet circle in the glow. At first, they spoke lightly. How strange the halls sounded without machines. How different the hospital looked in the half-dark. David's voice wavered when he finally admitted the truth. He had always feared the dark. As a child, he'd been locked inside a closet during a game. Tonight, that memory rushed back. His hands cold, heart racing, breath out of control. Something shifted. The doctor leaned forward, sharing a story of her own, of failing her first exam and sitting alone in her car, ashamed and ready to give up. A nurse added his fear of even climbing a step stool, how dizzy it left him, how ridiculous it felt to admit. Their words weren't instructions, they were confessions, pieces of their humanity placed carefully beside his fear. David's breathing slowed. His shoulders loosened. His gaze traveled from one lantern-lit face to another, registering their small laughs, the nervous smile that slipped through the quiet. The heaviness in his chest gave way, not because anyone cured it, but because they dared to be as human as he was. When the talk drifted to lighter things, childhood pets, terrible cooking attempts, he stayed. And when he finally rose, there was no frantic edge in his movements, only a calm stillness. For once, he had not been managed. He had been seen. And in the lingering hush of that room, the staff found themselves facing an unexpected realization as they gathered together. The break room carried a stillness, the lantern light flattening its edges and making every face feel closer. The smell of old coffee lingered, untouched mugs lined on the counter. For the first time all night, the team sat without rushing. A young resident finally broke the pause. He admitted he felt exposed without screens, like someone had taken away his sight. He didn't know whether to trust his hands, his ears, his own judgment. Maria leaned forward, the light catching her profile. Her voice softened. She told them she had once learned medicine in a small village clinic with no power at all. She knew how to diagnose fever by touch, dehydration by skin, pneumonia by breath sounds alone. She had learned to bedside diagnose without a single bulb. Her story shifted the room. The resident lowered his eyes, nodding slowly. Another doctor said they had been trained to read machines more than faces, to trust printouts more than observations. But sitting there now, they began to see what had been missing. They each remembered the moments that had first called them into medicine. Not test results, not screens, human presence. A surgeon spoke quietly of the simple act of holding a hand before anesthesia. An ER doctor remembered being thanked not for a treatment ordered, but for sitting through sobs in silence. Their truest moments weren't measured in data. The conversation grew lighter, but more certain. They promised themselves one small thing they could carry forward, even when the lights returned. To start every exam with eye contact and a hand on the wrist. To make presence the first tool, before anything else. No one said much after that. They sipped the cold coffee, the lantern flickering against walls, the hush holding their thoughts in place. What they carried wasn't new. It was something they had nearly forgotten, now recalled. In that quiet, they recognized that care itself was the current running through the night. And soon, a single beam of light would come to embody that truth, moving from one set of hands to another. The flashlight was always there, steady in the dark, traveling from one caregiver to the next. It lit the way through patient rooms, down long corridors, across supply shelves. Whoever held it used it with purpose, checking a wound, reading a label, finding blankets tucked in a corner. But its meaning grew each time it changed hands. When Dr. Evans placed it in a resident's palm, it wasn't just about light. It was trust. A quiet handoff of responsibility, both practical and human. The beam passed across an elderly man's cheek and made the shimmer of his tears visible. The beam passed across a nurse's face and revealed the curve of her smile as she soothed a child. The beam passed across a chart and landed on the steady hand of a doctor listening for a heartbeat. Delivery note. Narrator repeats "the beam passed" for rhythm in these 3 lines. In those small circles of light, connections deepened. Patients followed the glow, their eyes catching on it like something solid to hold. Staff leaned close, speaking softer, their words chosen with care. In the hushed ward, the flashlight didn't just push back the dark. It gathered people together. By the deepest hour of night, the tool was no longer ordinary. It was a symbol of trust and attention, simple as that. Each pass carried care forward, hand to hand, without ceremony. The bright spot swept across walls, across beds, across faces. What it lit was always human first: worry, relief, tenderness. It tied one moment to the next like stitches, not grand or dramatic, but enduring. The staff knew it was still only a flashlight, a cylinder of plastic and metal. Yet here it had become something larger, marking how much they could give with so little. It flickered and steadied, the room quiet except for voices and the soft rhythm of breath. Darkness defined it, yet it brought focus, a reminder that attention itself can illuminate. And while the night carried on under that beam, another sound was beginning to stir in the building. A vibration through the walls, faint at first, waiting to change everything. The lights came back in an instant, harsh and sudden. Overhead bulbs flared, monitors blinked alive, and the hospital filled again with its familiar glow. A single sharp beep cut through the ward, and then another, until the room was thick with electronic rhythm. For a moment, no one spoke. A nurse reached instinctively to silence the volume of a monitor, its shrill tone jarring after hours of quiet. Across the room, lanterns and flashlights that had carried the night now looked fragile against the flood of white light. One was switched off with a faint click, its warmth replaced by a glare that felt colder than expected. The team checked their patients, but the steps felt different. A resident compared his hand-counted pulse from earlier with the numbers on the screen. They matched closely. A nurse listened to the familiar hiss of a cuff inflating and set it against the digital reading beside her. Again, the same story. What their hands and ears had confirmed was now echoed by machines, but the reassurance felt less profound than it once did. The sounds of the hospital grew, layer over layer. Monitors beeped in their patterns, a printer clicked. The intercom broke in with announcements. What was once background hum now pressed loud, filling the spaces where soft voices had carried. Conversations shortened. Eye contact broke sooner. Patients felt the change most. Mr. Henderson turned his face from the brightness, pulling his blanket over his chin. Baby Leo stirred, restless under the sudden mechanical chorus. David's calm gaze faltered, darting toward the glowing screens that seemed to tug at the staff's attention. The caregivers stood in the middle of this restored order, and yet their emotions were mixed. Relief, yes, machines meant safety and precision again. But alongside it, a loss. In the stillness of the night, they had practiced medicine with directness and trust. Presence had been enough. Now the light itself seemed to pull them further from the people they were caring for. The electricity had returned, but for that team, it felt like something else had quietly slipped away. And with morning approaching, they would face a harder test. Not what to do when the power was gone, but how to carry forward what they had found in its absence. Morning light filtered into the emergency department, falling across the machines as they hummed back to their routines. Everything appeared the same as before. Monitors lit, equipment lined in order. But the team carried themselves differently. Their movements held a new weight, their eyes resting longer on people instead of numbers. Dr. Evans stopped at Mr. Henderson's bedside. Before looking at his heart monitor, she asked about his garden. 4-5 minutes passed in simple conversation. All the while, her hand stayed lightly on his wrist, feeling the steady beat as naturally as she had during the blackout. One habit carried forward, unspoken but present. Nurse Campbell walked toward a child burning with fever. She extended her palm first touching skin before touching tools. Warmth guided her assessment, the thermometer only confirming what she already knew. The new rhythm was clear. First, they looked, then they touched, then they verified. These 3 steps repeated again and again, blending presence with precision. A resident leaned in to listen to breath sounds through his stethoscope. Even as his ears caught the faint movement in the chest, his eyes stayed with the patient's. A nurse checked blood pressure while still holding the patient's hand, waiting for the cuff to deflate without letting go. Machines continued to provide safety. But human attention framed every reading. Around the station, glances passed between staff members. Small nods, faint smiles, silent confirmations of what they all felt. At times, they chose to pause an order, choosing instead to sit and talk. The blackout had reminded them that clinical judgment and conversation could stand together. Patients noticed too. Families spoke of the calm in the room, of the way the staff seemed to be fully present. You notice the difference yourself when someone looks at you rather than a screen. That shift mattered more than any reading could show. The crisis had closed, but its imprint stayed visible in each gesture. What began as an absence of power became a lesson threaded into routine. Their practice had not been stripped to weakness. It had been remade, steadier, more human. And in that morning light, another truth was waiting to be spoken. The brightest tech is no match for a steady human hand. That night showed what machines can't replace. Healing begins with presence, with a voice, a touch, a moment of stillness shared. The team carried that truth into the morning, and it remains medicine's oldest tool. Now we'd like to hear from you. When has simple human kindness been your strongest medicine? Share your story in the comments below. If you believe in these healing stories, subscribe for more. Enjoy the story.